professionalized army. So you may know that we have the suspension of the conscription since 1995. And so we have seen a downsizing effect in our military organization, which means that we have relatively small armies. So nowadays, I don't know if you're familiar with that, we have around 29,000 personnel, which is actually smaller than another organization like the Post. So if you take a comparison, for example, but the idea, and you may have heard about it, is that we would like to increase the amount of personnel and also to diminish the impact of the age, because we have had a relatively old army. So until recently, the mean age in our military was around 40 years old, which is quite old for a military. So the idea, of course, is to rejuvenate, to renew our personnel, and also to try to increase also the amount of our personnel. So what I can also say related to the evolution of our military organization is the technology intensive, and also the fact that we are operating with flexible force and also in a network. So if we look, for example, at our mission, we are operating under supranational framework, the UN, NATO, also our EU system. So for my PhD, for example, I did my PhD on the multinational collaboration in operations. So I went 2 times in Afghanistan, 2 times in Lebanon, and also in Bosnia, to try to decipher how military are collaborating together from different countries in, for example, a small airport like Kabul Airport, where we have 40 different nations. Okay? So I think that's also a very important evolution, that we are operating in such a framework. Then another dimension is a sort of shift about threat perception. So I think that we have had a sort of change since around a decade, since mainly the terrorist attack in Europe, and for example, and also in Brussels, in Paris. So since a decade, it has been a shift in the public perception. So when we were sending military personnel for taking part in operation, beforehand it was to Afghanistan mainly, or other countries were sending a lot of personnel to Iraq. So it was a very distant mission. And now we have seen since a decade that we are also operating a homeland. So homeland operation is also something which is very much engaging our military personnel. So you have seen military personnel in the streets in Brussels, perhaps, and it has been a shift, because when I entered the military 25 years ago, I couldn't imagine to see military personnel in the streets, except in France, usually have that. And now we see nowadays that here reservists or students here who are here in military uniform. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was not possible and not allowed. So it has been a mentality shift in the way that people are perceiving threats. And so we see that there is sort of rising concern over an uncertain strategic environment. And a second aspect, which has been popularized recently, is a sort of remobilization of our citizens. So there has been several initiatives. The more recent is the voluntary military service, but there has been other initiatives, like, for example, the track in high school. So we have a very popular track in high school in the north of Belgium and also in Wallonia. And so for several years we have people who are following curriculum in security and defense sector, not only for the defense sector, but we have conducted survey and we see that the defense sector is attracting the majority of them. Okay? So those initiatives are also an illustration of the sort of shared civic responsibility with regard to our security. So, who serves? At the Belgian Defense, our top priority is the human capital, so recruiting enough people. If we look at the position, we plan to hire almost 5,000 people next year, which is a lot of people. Until recently, 1 year or two, we're hiring, I think, 2,500. So we have doubled the amount of people we plan to hire, which is a real challenge for us. So of course, we attract a lot of people, but we have to retain them as well. So we are currently at the chair of sociology doing some survey on the retention and also on the attrition. So because, like you may imagine, it's not always easy to switch from a civilian mentality to a military mentality. But I mean, the process is not like that, you know. It's a transition process, and for some people, it's not that easy to do this transition phase. So we also see a diversification of profiles. So again, when we think about the military, and I'm also discovering that when we have our open door, a lot of people think about Top Gun, about Paracommando, Para, so very key example of stereotyping position in our military. Of course, those are important, but we have more than 300 different functions in our military. So when I did my sociology in Liège, I haven't heard about the Royal Military Academy. I didn't know that there was some sociologists working in the military. So I think that a lot of people still have a quite homogeneous image about the military. While, for example, we have also civilian working like me for the military. So I was giving an interview this morning for the CNAC and referring to the fact that, and yesterday was for the Newsblad, yeah, we also have civilian working for the military. And on that point, in comparison with other countries, we have a limited amount of civilians, so around 10%. Other countries have 20, 30%. So you see, it has also an impact on the image that you have regarding the military. So diversification of profiles is one element. We also think a lot about combat function, and as you may know, combat is not limited to physical combat nowadays. So we also, with the cyber dimension, we also have a diversification of profile which is at stake. So it has an impact also on the cohesion. So it's much more difficult to build cohesion with people who are different. We also maybe have the image of the band of brothers, maybe you saw that several years ago. People who are very similar, men, so very typical profile. And of course nowadays we have to build an organization with different profiles. So I think about gender, for example. We have 12% of our military personnel who are women. Half of the civilians are women. So yeah, there is a diversification process. Speaking about ethnic diversity, our organization has opened its door to EU citizens since 2003, if I'm not mistaken. So there is a diversification of process in line with that. Who belongs? Still, we see that military organizations do not fully mirror our society in terms of gender. I was just mentioning the fact that we have around 12% of our military personnel who are women. Of course, in our society, half of them are women. Speaking about ethnicity, that's the same. But we try through various initiatives to work more and more on inclusion, to attract diverse profiles. So it's a kind of work in progress. And I think it's also really important to build trust also with regard to our citizens in our multicultural society. So I think there is a direct link between internal diversity, operational effectiveness. Of course, if you have diverse team, for example, in operation, want to build trust and contact with women, with children, it's much more easy if you have a diverse team than if you have a team of 6 men. And also, it's also a question of external legitimacy. So, like I just mentioned, there is a growing attention to inclusion in various ways. For example, at the Military Academy, some years ago, we have created the Diversity and Inclusion Group, and there are several initiatives at various levels in the military, at the Belgian Defense. We have also conducted several surveys on women, but not only on ethnic diversity also, and we see that there is still dimension of racism, sexism, Islamophobia, and that is of course an important point of attention for us, working on those aspects, and it also sadly reflects the dimension and the challenges that we also have in our society. So inclusion is, according to what we have seen, of course, a very important issue for the military, but also for our society. Speaking about cohesion and legitimacy, like I just mentioned, we have a more differentiated organization. We have also a kind of civilianization process, which means that more and more function, there is a sort of blurring process between traditional military position and also civilian role. I think one major impact is also the use of AI. Thank you. But I think we'll come back on that later today. And an important aspect, according to me, is the socialization process in order to build trust, to share same values in a more and more differentiated military organization. External challenges, I think that we'll have to work, and it's already at stake, on the public-private collaboration. You also may have seen the growing number of reservists. We plan to hire 1,050 reservists, and it's also very interesting for us and also for society to have those dual identity. So that's an important pillar for us to improve that pillar. And as a challenge, I also see the fact that there is a growing polarization process in our society, and we can also see the Belgian Defense as one of the last national symbols. And I think that we also have to manage what I see the sort of growing divide sometimes in our society, and we have to work on it also at the Belgian Defense. And one pressure maybe is also the growing defense expenditure. We see there are several polls, public opinion polls, which have been conducted, and we see that not the majority of citizens is supporting an increase of budget defense. So it's also, I think, one element which is really important for us in order to function with a lot of efficiency, and also to attract people to come and to be, of course, effective in what we are doing. So the future of defense, living amid uncertainty, I think that it's very difficult to answer the question here tonight. It's very difficult to predict, of course, what will happen. We can still identify some predictable trends. Of course, the technological evolution. If we look at demographic trend, aging population, recruitment patterns, we see, of course, we can predict some, or anticipate some elements, but there's always some limits to those predictions with regard to global dynamic crisis, and those can disrupt even the best laid plans. So here the idea was to illustrate some tendencies with regard to our military organization. So I think my time is up, so I will end now and will be happy to answer your questions later in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Great pleasure to be here. So I will talk about cybersecurity and defense, and I'm from the group Computer Security Industrial Cryptography, created in 1978 before my time. But at that time, most of cryptography was military, and there was a deliberate decision to start working on industrial cryptography for industrial application. So the world is becoming digital. Global economy was 2 years ago $100 trillion, and digital part is growing, depending on how you measure things, around something like a quarter, which is digital. The economy becomes digital, and also there's more and more devices on the internet, about 10 billion computers, laptops, tablets, about 20 billion IoT devices, Internet of Things, which is your car, but also your dishwasher, your laundry machine, all these things. Try to go to a shop and try to buy a dishwasher that does not have an app. You will not succeed, and if you decide not to activate the app, then you will not have all the functionality. So everything has to be on the internet, and of course that brings great benefits, but also risks. Something of terminology, how do I look at this term cyber? Well, actually, mostly in the Eastern Bloc, the term cybernetics was used. What we would call control system or control theory is the study of communication and control systems in living beings and machines. But not only computers, but also biology. You still, if you go to Eastern Europe and Russia, you still find cybernetics departments. And then when the internet became more widely used in the early 80s, the term cyberspace was coined, still not used by general public. In 1987, an article appeared in the Online magazine discussing cyber war, and actually very interesting. It was about robots having a cyber war, very visionary. But at least I was working on cryptography and information security, but somehow 15, 20 years ago, the term cybersecurity started to be used. And then at some moment, Obama used the term, and then everything was called cybersecurity. Even today, people say, I'm in cyber. It actually means they're in management, but it now means something else in cybersecurity. So, if you think about problems in cybersecurity, people think of hackers. Of course, if you look today at hackers, they probably are CEOs of companies, and they look more like this. Actually, online services work. We also have organized crime shifting, because as our economy is digital, nobody robs banks anymore, because there is no money in the bank. So now, actually, crime has also moved online. We have insider problems in organizations, digital hackers. We have intelligence services, but also other actors, I'll come back to this, that also be active in hacking systems. And then, of course, those things are less visible. Intelligence services, organized crime, insiders, they don't want to be seen, unlike some of the hackers who did this for publicity. But you also see hacktivists who actually want to use the hacking efforts to get visibility, to pay attention for their cause. And of course, we also have cyber war and alcohol. Now, more or less, nation states are also combating each other in the cyber. So I'll say a few things about cyber war and hybrid war, and I'll focus mostly on how intelligence is shifting from passive to active. So intelligence is used to be spying and collecting information, but this has become more and more also hacking into systems and breaking systems. And I will say a few things about AI and about also rules we need for cyberspace. So there were lots of announcements and warnings throughout the 80s and 90s about cyber Pearl Harbor and big incidents, but nothing much happened. And most people were skeptical until in Estonia, some politicians decided to move a statue from the Russian times, and then they got the DDoS attack from Russia, and Estonia is proud to be one of the most digital societies. And actually the governments and services were brought down by this denial of service attack, where you first hack many systems, and then from then there on you bring down services. Then you had the war in Georgia, where in parallel with the military action, there was also defacement of the website of the parliament and lots of digital hacks. And then in 2010, Stuxnet happened. So Israel and the US released a virus that actually made the centrifuges in the basement in Iran spin too fast, and they destroyed about 25% of the centrifuges. So this was the first time there were kinetic effects, things breaking down because of digital hacks. It really got serious in the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. So several times the Russians hacked the electricity system. In the cold there in winter, they completely falls out. People were not prepared, and there were many problems. There were also attacks on the government systems. And then a second attack was launched in 2007 on the power grids. And this attack is quite interesting because this attack used NotPetya. And what happened, we have to go back in time, in the early 90s, the NSA, I guess you all know what the NSA is, the US Secret Service, they discovered a flaw in Microsoft systems. But rather than telling Microsoft that they fix it, they kept the flaw, and they used it themselves to hack them. And then something happened, the NSA itself was hacked by the Russians. And the Russians got this weakness as well, and they used it to make malware, eventually attack other systems, and they used it against Ukraine. The problem was their malware was a bit too aggressive, and so it actually spread all over Europe, and we got a NotPetya attack. The company Merck, let's go back to the paper document, and they estimate the total cost for them between $250 and $300 million. The FBI believed that the total cost of the NotPetya attack was about $10 billion. In the UK, people got their operations cancelled because the UK health system was not up to date and was no longer good. So there was really effect. Did people die? Not sure, but there was a very big effect. And I think it's interesting to see what actually the cause was. The cause was the NSA not telling Microsoft they were wrong. That was actually the real collateral damage. And of course, the other factors also were responsible. The Russians made the money. You see more things in the last decade. We had, of course, the hack of the Democratic National Committee, the emails being leaked, probably influencing US elections. We got a very big supply chain attack, SolarWinds. During a whole year, the Russian Secret Service hacked a supplier of many companies and organizations, and they had full access, by hacking the supplier, they had full access to all the organizations. Many ministries in the US, the Pentagon, also the European Commission, NATO, many were vulnerable for a very long time, and they all had to clean out all the systems. Then, at the start of the special military operation, also the Russians also did quite some hacks, and one of them was against satellite systems, but actually also hit German windmills, because they were using the same satellite system. So again, you see collateral damage. And then maybe more recently, not on my slide, but about a year ago, the pages were hacked in Lebanon. But there we see really little effect, people died. There was clear intent, this was not collateral damage, and there was little message. So if you're still skeptical, I think you can be sure that a year ago, the cyber war happened. In general, our infrastructure is more digital. I mentioned the IoT, and it's also vulnerable. Dick Cheney, the late Dick Cheney, didn't want a pacemaker with a wireless interface because he was worried that he would be hacked through his pacemaker. People have been hacking cars. You stick with. People are worried about our solar converters. turns out that most of our solar converters are Chinese. And if you would bring them all down, all the great solar panels we have, it would actually bring down the network in Belgium. Nobody would die, but it would be very unpleasant. You would have no electricity for quite a while. Another nice example is the Mirai botnet. Their IoT devices like webcams were hacked, I think about 1 million, and it was used to bring down internet services. So its civil infrastructure is also being the target of hackers and the organized crime and the nation states and the groups. So why is the cyber world different? Well, first, we can do everything remotely. So North Korea can be very active in this space and actually makes quite some money with ransomware. They don't have to show up in front of your door. It's very hard to trace attacks then. Attribution is very difficult. So it's also very difficult to respond because you don't know who did it. And North Korea will not come after our systems. They will first hack a system in Africa, from there a system in Latin America, from there somewhere in Turkey, and then it will come to us. So if you have to trace it back, it will be a very long effort, and it's still very hard to prove who was behind. The scale can be very large, as the Mirai botnet showed. You just hack 1 million webcams, and you use it then to bring down big services. And of course, the impact can be very large as well. You can put the country without power for an extended period of time. And we haven't seen a serious attack. My guess, or the insider in this, is that several nations are capable of doing this. But it's like with nuclear threat, it's mutual destruction. If you bring down my stupid and blow up the main transformers, I will do it. This is just the reason why we haven't seen it. So, internet makes things more complex because the internet has no boundaries. There is no Belgian internet, and German internet, and French internet, and American internet. It's the internet. Of course, China has built the Great Firewall of China. They try to have their own internet. Also, Russia has done some efforts, but in general, it's a global internet, and the internet is run by private companies. The internet is run by Google, by Cloudflare. We have systems from Huawei on there, so in fact, it's private infrastructure. Unlike our roads, which are public infrastructure, our digital roads are in private hands. There is also a blurring between individual and collective problems. Think of the webcam. If you actually don't upgrade your stuff, update your stuff, you buy insecure webcams, your devices at home can be used to hack on. And I'm not blaming individual consumers. To some extent, the decisions you make as an individual affect the whole society. And this is, I think, very different from in the physical world where what an individual does doesn't matter as much. And of course, also economically, the boundaries are blurring. Economics and what is policy is blurring again. You see that in the press, there is debates about Huawei delivering routers for 5G and 6G. There is debate about NVIDIA. So there is concern that if you give the most advanced NVIDIA processors to China, they will use it for military applications as well. So things that were very separate, the military industry, the civilian industry, are actually now merging. And the NVIDIA GPUs, they can be used for anything. They can be used to make large language models, but they can also be used, of course, to control drones or to build autonomous vehicles. And this, I guess, these things were clearly separate. There was something military technology and civil technology, and now this is all blurred. This is a struggle for universities because in Belgium we have a tradition of not doing military research here. But if you now work on technology, all technology can and will be used by the military. Very hard to separate things. I guess the only thing that typically do not do, of course, in university is build naval weapons. We don't shoot rockets or we don't build guns. More or less all these technologies use things we use like vision systems, security systems, robots, and so on. They will all be used. So in cyber war, it's state-level conflict, traditional means. That's more or less what it is, with a goal to disrupt, damage, or gain advantage in critical infrastructure. And this infrastructure can be military. That was the first concern, that we would go after the radar networks, the military communication networks. It can also be government networks, as we saw in Estonia and Georgia. It can also be civilian. It can can also disrupt security networks, and that of course can create economic damage. For example, if you can bring down the stock market of a nation, you create economic damage. You can bring down the financial system, you can create economic damage. And as I said, it's covered, it's deniable, it's very hard to prove who did this, and you can do it with it. Hybrid war goes a step further. There you combine military force with non-military force, and including also cyber techniques, in general to confuse, to destabilize, to weaken an opponent, without really triggering full-scale act of war. This is known as the game that Russia is now playing with Europe, if we can call it a game. We try to push many things, to sabotage, blow things up, put things on fire, spread propaganda, and you see what the response is. But in fact, you never create a real war, so you don't get a real physical war as a response. We don't fire rockets at Russia. So it's a whole range of techniques, including cyber techniques. Cyber war is part of this, but you do also other things like manipulation, propaganda, economic pressures, political pressures. I will focus more on cyber war because that's more a terrain I'm familiar with, at least I understand it better. So in cyber world, attacking is always easier than defending, because in defense, in cyber war, you have to make sure that the complex system doesn't have a single problem. If you make one mistake, then you're vulnerable. So attacking is always a lot easier in war than defending. We don't know if deterrence works. I guess we're still experimenting this. Does it actually, do we actually threaten Russia to do things back, or do they actually then stop? Or what should we do as level of response to make sure that the response on the other side remains acceptable? I think this is still something we are finding out. And in general also, intelligence is mixing with sabotage. Intelligence means collecting information with actually hacking. So in general, the relation is quite complex, but you have military with specific goals, and then you have intelligence services, foreign, but like in some countries, like in Western France, the foreign intelligence is part of the military, but like in Germany or the UK, it's not. And then you have the domestic intelligence, like FBI or MI5, and then you have the private sector. And in the physical world, it was all very separate, they all had their role. Now, if you look at digital space, they're all hacking. In fact, they're all doing the same thing, and in the US sometimes even competing with each other. Which is a bit of a problem because they all have different rules, right? The military has very different rules. They have very clear rules of engagement. Very often Parliament has to intervene. There is supervision in a specific form. They have specific targets. They cannot target civilians. What is the rule of spying? Don't get caught. There is no laws about spies. If you're a spy, you get caught. There is no rules. The rule is don't get caught. So this was very clear, but now if you're in the, what is it, in the digital world, because now everybody is spying. And spying is not restricted. So I just wanted to show this because it's interesting that this debate was actually quite lively about 10 to 15 years ago. So there was a paper by MIT warning about militarization of cyberspace, exactly what I'm explaining now. And there was actually a book written in 2013 saying, it's never going to happen. We will not see an attack that is lethal, intentional, and political. So prediction is very difficult, especially of the future. But unfortunately, we now know who was right. We do have cyber weapons. In general, nation states are very active for intelligence in hacking systems. And it's not only Secret Service and military, it's also loose groups that there is liability. So for example, in Russia, you have Cozy Bear, you have these organizations named by intelligence services, or sometimes by investigators. So there's lots of groups where there is liability or involvement with the government. From Snowden, we know that the slogan of the NSA was collect it all, know it all, exploit it all, and we thought, or some of us thought that exploit it all means that we should exploit the information, but he meant exploiting the systems. In fact, the NSA is hacking everything, and if the other nation states were not doing it, they all read the slides and they are all hacking. And I know Germany has created a new university just to train the hackers at Bundeswehr University in Munich. And at large scale, they're hiring thousands and thousands of people to do this. I think also in Belgium, we now have a cyber division where there's people doing the same thing. If you're too small, you can also have commercial companies. I can give you an example. They're very interesting. They're Italian. And they're very interesting because they were hacked. And so you can go on Wikipedia and you can read who their customers were, what kind of tools they had, and you will see that they not always were selling to ethical values. Khashoggi was in the news again with a visit to the White House last week. So Khashoggi was eavesdropped by NSO Group with the zero-click attack. And so NSO Group made one mistake, they got caught. So more or less, there is private companies that sell tools, and it is to law enforcement, but also to intelligence services and to military to actually hack stuff. And if you want to read more about this, Nicole Perlroy wrote a great book about this. But today, if you find a flaw that can take remote control of an iPhone, Apple will pay you $2 million in exchange of you not making it public, and you give them the time to fix it. If you go with the same flaw on the black market, I don't know what you get, but if you read this book, it's multiple. You probably get $5 to $10 million for a flaw that takes remote control of an iPhone. And who buys it? Governments. Our own governments are in this market, and instead of helping Apple, they actually are doing this. So more or less, we've ended up in a world which is more like the pirate life, where pirates are private entities that work on behalf of governments and with governments to make money. So Microsoft was a victim of NotPetya, asked 8 years ago for the Geneva Convention. They said, actually, you cannot attack civilians in wartime. This is the Geneva Convention. In the digital world, civilians are attacked in peacetime. There was a recent paper by the Carnegie Endowment saying the same thing. We still don't have an agreement. And in the interest of time, I'll skip this. I want to say a few things about AI in a few seconds left. I was at an event of KU Leuven about ethics, and people said that we should never have killer drones. This was 5 or 6 years ago. I'm afraid we have them already. And if you look at the amount of money being invested, big tech in the US invested this year only $405 billion in AI. Okay. Then there is a Stargate project, $500 billion for the next 4 years. Europe announced $200 billion for the next 5 years. So that's like less than 10% of the US investment. And the Pentagon asked for $13 billion only for AI to build autonomous devices and killer robots. So I think this debate, shall we have killer robots? I'm afraid it's over. They will be there, whether we like it or not. So time to wrap up. So no need to panic. It's okay. It's going to be very interesting times. You know the Chinese, they have been saying, may your times be interesting, and they don't mean it very well. I think your times will be interesting. We do need international agreements. We all agree about this, that this cannot go on like this. But for now, it seems we're not there yet. We probably need to do more to secure our infrastructure. And you have to secure your webcam and your washing machine. That's your job. And for Europe, given that we import everything, we should probably push more for open systems. At least we can control them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Kijk, volgens mij krijg je maar dat eten. Volgens mij krijg je maar dat eten. Volgens mij is mij wel iets te drinken.
Ja, ja, sowieso, ja. Dat is wel interessant.
Hey everyone, people here in the room and people at home, thank you for being here. And I'm very happy to see that there are a lot of people who are concerned about what's going on in the world. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about something that's not well known in our society, and I think it merits a little bit more attention. So tonight I will talk to you about what's military medicine and why do we need it. And I'm very happy to see a lot of our medical students in the room. So if you have questions afterwards, we have a good bunch of people to answer your questions. Secondly, I will talk about the spectrum of operations Belgian medical military services need to be able to provide, about our medical capability and capacity building, how does it work in NATO, and then future technologies and future challenges. I think well situated in between the two speakers because you're really in the middle of what's cyber and what's ethical. And then finally, I will talk to you about the need for societal commitment to the future impressions. So these are my opinions. I didn't check them with the Chief of Defense tonight, so I think he's protecting me. In general, I think for the general population in Belgium, the different forces, Army, Air and Navy are quite well known. Everyone knows that we have them. The medical forces are not that well known. A lot of people think we don't have them anymore, and that's because we are enabling the others, and we're not always on the front line. They don't see us everywhere. We don't have nice jets, we don't have big ships to show on the newspapers, so we're not that well known. And then of course, since there are a lot of cyber wars going on, we have recently started a cyber force. This year started, Belgian Defense started with cyber force. But I'm going to talk to you about the medical services. So as you heard in the introduction, I am a doctor, but I'm also an officer, I'm also a general. So there's always this duality within our military doctors. It's feeling a little bit like Jekyll and Hyde sometimes, but you have these two things in you, and yeah, it sometimes creates some tension. But you can't split them up. But this picture was used by the Ukrainians to show that we need to add some green to the white. So that's their expression, okay, you have to make your health system a little bit more military in the future. We have in Belgium 6 medical units. Most people know the military hospital because that's sometimes in the news, but our most important units are 2 operational medical battalions supporting the air, the land, and the Navy forces. And of course our training center where we really teach our soldiers and also our medical personnel how to use certain military techniques, because it is different from civilian healthcare. We are all-rounders and we are used to work with basic materials. We have to be adaptable, flexible, and it's completely different from the hyper-specialized civilian healthcare. And I think with all the cyber that is going on, I think it's important that we stay with very simple procedures. We have 3 types of recruitment. We have our youngsters who come to us via the Royal Military Academy, and so they do summer camps and military training together with Royal Military Academy, but they're studying here at civilian universities in Belgium. And then of course we can recruit people after their medical school, and also we get more and more reserves personnel. And so our students, they get their doctor training, but they do military training, so during the summer time, when everyone is having parties and being on holidays, these guys come to us and we train them, we make them spend a lot of days without a lot of sleep. They have to sleep in terrible conditions, they get really dirty food, but they're still here, so I'm really happy they're good. We're not very numerous. There are about 120 active military doctors in Belgium, so we are definitely hiring, and so if there are people who want to join us, please come and see me afterwards. A little bit of a word on the spectrum of military operations. I will talk to you a little bit about my career, showing you what the differences are. When I started as a young doctor, it was a post-Cold War era, and so we had active military, and we had also circumscripts in the army, and we had a lot of troops stationed in Germany. These troops, they even had their families with them for a long period of time, and so we had a national system providing healthcare to these people with general practitioners and every kind of specialty. So we even had pediatricians and gynecologists, something that doesn't exist anymore. But then the Berlin Wall fell, and like was said by my colleague, the military service, compulsory service, was suspended in Belgium in 1994, and so the tanker of Belgian defense had to shift, and so we started being part of peacekeeping missions under UN and NATO umbrellas in Kosovo and Lebanon. And we were working at that time in international teams because of the scarcity of personnel. We were scrambling doctors everywhere in NATO, so I was working in the emergency department in the field hospital and in the operating theater. My French colleagues were working, for example. So we had a focus on general practitioners, emergency medicine, and surgical teams. That was it. And we were driving around in jeeps without armored stuff, so we were quite vulnerable at the time. Then the global war on terror started, and all of a sudden Belgian defense started doing peace enforcing missions under the NATO umbrella. Still active military, no support from reserves or other circumscripts, and so we were still working in international teams. And we had emergency doctors and surgical teams, and we also saw the appearance of a lot of AEDEVAC teams, which means aeromedical teams, because we got our victims from the point of injury with helicopters to a medical treatment facility as soon as possible. At the time, we didn't drive around anymore in these small jeeps, and we got these really big armored vehicles. But of course, natural disasters are very hard to predict, and so from time to time, Belgian defense also had to participate in humanitarian aid. And so I went to Sri Lanka after the tsunami to work in refugee camps, and so we did this together with the Red Cross. Some missions we did solo, some we did with EFAS, some we did with the EU, and this was emergency medicine and surgical care teams. All this peacekeeping, peace enforcing, and humanitarian, that's what we call crisis response operations. And so we got quite good at it. But now, since the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, we are really looking at large-scale combat operations. We have to prepare for that. NATO decided, okay, we have to do our DDA, family of plans, deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, and we will face, if World War III starts, we will face large-scale combat operations. These days we get a lot of questions from hospitals, how do we have to cope with it? Well, I don't have a clue either, because we have not been doing this the last couple of years. So what we are doing now, we are looking at the lessons learned from Ukraine, and that's the only information we have, the only thing we can base ourselves on. Or we can start reading books again from how they did it in World War I and II. But it is for sure that we will need a lot more doctors. We will need GPs, emergency physicians, surgical teams, we will need psychiatrists, we will need rehabilitation medicine, and we will need different kinds of surgical teams. We will have to add neurosurgery and mouth, face, and throat surgeries as well. So it will be very different from what we have been used to, and it's quite scary, I must say. Maybe a little bit of difference as well with what we did in the past. During crisis response operations, we had a limited number of patients. If we had a day with 20 patients, it had been busy. If we are facing large-scale combats, it will be more than 100 patients a day, every day. So it will be huge. We won't have air superiority, that's for sure. We don't know if we will have health information systems. It will be for sure that we won't have enough medical logistics because the supply chain will break down, that's for sure. And the big difference is that when we were in Afghanistan, although it's a big country, the surface was limited. If we will face large-scale combats with NATO, it will mean that we are talking about the entire world almost, except from Africa and South America, but I think further on, everyone else will be involved. So we are talking about a huge space, and it means that we have to transport our patients over vast distances. How does NATO work, and how does it prepare these kind of plans? Well, in 2022, NATO wrote its strategic concepts saying, okay, we have 3 core tasks with NATO. One is deterrence and defense of the NATO territory. We have to prevent crises and do crisis management, and we have to work together on security. For this task, they developed plans, and they developed regional plans, because of course NATO is very big, a lot of countries are part of it, and so Belgium is taking place in three of these plans, is part of three of these plans. NATO does tabletop exercises, or wargaming as they call it, and when they do this wargaming, they see, okay, we need X number of tanks, X number of planes, how will we defend the NATO territory? And so they calculate the number of personnel and material they need, and they go to the different NATO countries and say, hey, this is our shopping list, and your country needs to buy this, this, and this. And so the same happens. They come to us and they say, okay, your land forces, your air force, your navy, you have to do this and this, and what do you need to support them from a medical point of view? So we buy everything from drugs, backpacks, ambulances, helicopters who can transport patients, planes, equipment to put in planes to transfer the patients, tents, everything you need to take care of patients. Digital systems costing a lot of money these days, and so all this is on the shopping list, and that's why we need to spend 2% of the GDP on defense. There are a lot of challenges in the future. These challenges are always there in preparation for a war. Every time and time again, people develop a lot of plans, they train, they get certain expertise. Then when the war is over, this expertise drops again, because countries don't like spending a lot of money on defense, and definitely not on the medical services, because that's not really sexy. And so every time and time after a war, we get into a dip with our experience. And so this happens after World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Operation Enduring Freedom, and so we are at the bottom here of the dip. And we are climbing slowly up, but this time I think we don't have a lot of time to climb up, so we really have to hurry. What changed compared to Afghanistan? A big, big change, and one that's really worrisome. It's drones and electronic warfare. So what did these drones change for us medical services? Well, they made the battlefields transparent and consistent. What does it mean? It means that you can't do anything on the battlefield without being seen by the enemy. So it also means if there's a victim, you can't go and get them, because a drone will spot you and they will attack you. So what happened in Ukraine in the beginning, they transported their patients during the night. But technology evolves, and so the drones got night vision, and so they can't transport them anymore at night without being seen. So they now do it when it's raining, when there's a lot of wind, and during 2 periods a day, when they have to change from day vision to night vision. And so it has a huge impact on military medical services, because you get your patients in at a very late stage and they're in a really bad condition. So staying and playing on the battlefield like we did in Afghanistan, we can't do this anymore. We have to scoop and run and hope for the best. And in the meantime, we have to try to conceal ourselves and to deceive the enemy. So what we see with our Ukrainian colleagues, they're going underground. They don't put up tents anymore. They work in basements and they try to camouflage as best as they can. No ambulances with Red Crosses, because Russia likes to attack the Red Crosses. So Geneva Conventions are no longer respected and the Red Cross is attacked. But they will take it a step further. We know that they are developing a lot of these technologies, and so they will try to weaponize health. They are working on human enhancement and human augmentation. They are working on robotization. They are working on neurotechnology, where they try to make brain-computer interfaces for the soldiers. They are using AI to model all kinds of proteins. Very good if you use it to create pharmaceuticals. Very bad if you use it to create toxicology products. We know that they are trying out lenses in the eyes of patients so that they can look around at night, so that they have night vision lenses implanted. They are biomanufacturing materials, they're modifying DNA, so it's really quite scary. And I think that's where the universities come in, because we don't have enough of these scientific research departments anymore. But we will have to try to defend ourselves, and so we will need people who help us out in defending us against all these new technologies. NATO created a medical action plan. How can we try to give the best, provide the best care possible on the field if we don't have enough people and all these terrible things going on? And so we're looking at how can we expand workforce, how can we train people, not in medical school during 9 years or 12 years, but how can we be faster, how can we get people to do something on a short time without increasing the risks too much? How can we work without emptying the civilian healthcare department? And these are really difficult questions to answer. We're also looking at a lot of regulatory framework, because there's no link yet. The legislation only speaks about peace and war and nothing in between, but now with cyber, where does the war start? The war is already going on, but it hasn't been officially declared. So all this legislation needs to be adapted, and there's a lot of legislation on patient rights and pharmaceuticals that we have to put a military code on. We're investing in buses, trains, to transport our patients. We're investing in IT to keep track of these patients, because there will be a lot of them over large distances, so we have to see where they are at. And we're trying to get new logistical solutions, because just the design logistics doesn't work when you're in a large scale complex. You need stockpile, have strategic stocks, and preferably somewhere close to the front line. So we need a lot of help from everyone. I think it's very necessary that everyone is well aware that there's a huge crisis ahead of us. And so they speak about the whole of government approach. Everyone will need to help out, the whole government. I think it will be a very difficult exercise, because not every EU country is in NATO, not every NATO country is part of the EU, etc. It's very complicated. It will be very complicated when we talk legislation, and I think with our own Belgian government it will also be very difficult. If they don't get to a budget agreement by the end of the year, I'm really worried. But we also need you to bear resilience, to make sure that we keep our healthcare beds empty for patients who will definitely come. So preventive medicine will become important. I think it's important that you learn about self-care, that you know how to help each other out, that people start doing blood donations, because we will need a lot of blood. Blood will be gold. Every country is now developing new techniques to get blood stockpiling. So, very important. And if you're still looking for present for the history, I think there's some good books on what does it mean for society if you're at risk, how can everyone contribute. And I think one of the book on the Bermuda Deal, it was really on, if you're at university, you start at university and think, I want to make the world a better place. But then at the end, people go to this big consultancy firms and not to federal departments. So my plea is, please come and help us out instead of going to the guys who pay you a lot of money. But we will have to work together anyway, and so teams, please let us team up to face the next crisis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. After these 3 lectures, I have to come with something. sometimes more boring, but I think also very important. When we talk about ethics and defense at the university, because this is something which is not so evident. Defense and universities are not at all events in the past, and we have to see how we will go further in the future. So, first of all, I will give a short overview of some huge opportunities that are coming to us, the university, in the field of defense-related research on different levels. Then we will see, and we have heard already several paradigm shifts. Also here at the university, there is an ongoing paradigm shift concerning or dealing with defense research. Then I will spend a bit of time at the policy of the KU Leuven related to military and defense-related research. And finally, I will give some words on our Commission Ethics Committee on dual use, military use and misuse. This in the field of research, and I should also say that human rights are also included in this ethics committee. So just some words about what is happening, and this is important because we see that a lot of places, a lot of instances are preparing the university to go into defense research. Let us first start with the Flemish government. Very recently, they agreed, in April, they agreed on the Flemish defense plan, and they will try to stimulate industry and, as they call it, universities, the academic institutes, etc. They try to stimulate member projects in the field of defense. Not only defense as such, but also in applications or in projects dealing with dual use. Dual use, that means projects which are originally intended for civil applications, but where also military or defense applications are possible. You see only 10 million for this year, but that will increase in the next years. One of the important things is that in this defense plan, they skipped the famous Van den Brande guidelines and Muiters guidelines. Two ministers who were responsible for the regulation of research in the field of defense, especially in universities, but also in the industry. So it was very clear in this period that purely offensive military projects were completely impossible. But also dual use projects were not stimulated, and they were only accepted if there were clear civilian applications. So that was what is skipped by the present government, and then they asked the knowledge institutions, universities, etc., to contribute more actively to security and defense challenges. Instead of saying no to defense at the university, they are stimulated. And they say also that it is important that they give their knowledge, they give their wisdom to the military to improve their equipment, their technology, etc. And the last sentence, in addition to a necessary change in mentality, the government also knows that university is not completely open to that change. So therefore they ask for a mentality change amongst the professors, amongst the students, amongst the scientific researchers. On the next level, when we are at the federal level, where defense is in fact regulated, stimulated in Belgium. There they hope that we come to a type of triple helix, as they call it. So the industry at one end, defense, and the academia or the knowledge institutes, and that they collaborate together in order to improve our abilities in defense. At this moment, we are talking about 20-30 millions, but they hope to bring it up to 280 million a year, euros a year, which is almost about half of the budget that is spent by FWO for research in Flanders. If you look to the slide, this slide, I will not give details, but you see immediately points which are touching activities at the university. And we have heard about cyber, but there are other topics like AI, medical, as well as the evacuation, etc. But also the other topics like sensor technologies, and those other topics are very known to the researchers here in our university. So there can be a connection between university and these programs. And moreover, Europe is even more stimulating activities in the field of defense, and here we don't talk about millions, but about billions. What are these politicians hoping for? So they like to get defense industry innovation ecosystems. Systems where companies, government, like defense, and academic institutions are collaborating to develop new military technologies. And the examples are given already a few times: cybersecurity, AI, aerospace, and defense. So this is just to give the new environment which was not existing 10 years ago, which was even not existing 5 years ago, which is upcoming the last 5 years. Flanders is stimulating the university, it's giving a lot of money. Europe, a few weeks ago, the Horizon Europe, or the European Commission agreed that Horizon Europe will accept also dual research and military research. The NATO is also there, these programs, to stimulate universities to collaborate with them in order to improve defense and technology for military. Now, some words about the tension between defense and universities. This is just a few ideas, not more than that. It's not a systematic study, but if we go back to the 60s and 70s, we see that there was a lot of student protest. They were against the NATO. They were, you should also know that it was the time of the Vietnam War. Students were very against military things, and even when a professor was going to a conference which was organized by AGAR, which was a NATO organization, the students were already demonstrating. Then later on, this demonstration of students and of the researchers at the university was coming back when the nuclear war weapons came to kind of global. Around the 2000, the university started to get a policy on how to deal with military research at university. Before, there was very few topics, very few projects on military topics. And then, since the last 10-15 years, well, the shift is ongoing, but not everybody is following at the university. We should say that maybe this is just a rough estimation, but 50% is agreeing that defense-related topics are dealt with, but the other 50% says no, university is a place of peace and we should work at peace. So, some arguments for the proponents and people that think that defense-related research at university is a good thing. So they see that there's improvement of national security, freedom of research, peacekeeping can be forced in that way, and we can help democratic states to defend themselves and the freedom. The opponents say, peace is the purpose of our work. Knowledge should serve peace and not war. Science is open, and when we work together with defense, then we should work under secret circumstances. We like to publish. No, not publish, because the enemy is reading it. Some people are afraid of the human rights, the respect for the human rights. Some people are afraid of the reputation of the university. Who's working together with weapon industry. So they ask for focus on civil use. So then we come to the question, when do we have responsible and irresponsible defense-related research? I think we have heard today already good examples of responsible research, and if we think of cyber defense tools or battlefield medicine, we have but if we are talking about enhancing weapons, if we are talking about tools that can violate human rights, if we are developing surveillance tools for suppressive regimes, if we are developing cyber offensive tools, then one becomes more or less fascinating. So, here comes the tension now between academic freedom and, on the other hand, the responsibility for our society, knowledge for the good of the society. And so for every project that we start, we should put ourselves in question mode and ask, what is the topic itself? Am I working with good partners? Who's paying? And what is the purpose of my research? Applications, who will use it, etc. From that point on, in 2022, the Commission had for almost 2 years discussions on what policy we will follow on military research. And in the end, there came a white paper, white paper of 9 pages, as usual, but the essence is that the KU Leuven will remain a civil organization strongly committed to peace and conflict prevention. But if defense research is needed to defend democracy, freedom, and human rights, then the university cannot stay at the sideline. So, research in the defense area is possible, but only when it's deemed necessary by competent authorities, and then we think that Flanders authority, federal authorities in Europe and the NATO, and that every project is screened by the ethics committee. And in the end, the university will not become a military university, but remains a civil university with the strongly commitment to peace and conflict prevention. So how do we do that? Well, most of the projects that are passing in this or that are ongoing in this university are civil. They have no links with military or defense, and they, like I say, they all possibility that in 20 years' time or in 5 years' time, there can be a shift in the applications, but in principle, most projects are non-military. But if there are reasons to doubt about it, then we have a system that we check these proposals or by the investigation itself, and will show the self-assessment tool, or by a training group who's assessing all the projects that are approved or all the project proposals from sensitive goals, for instance, in the field of cybersecurity. What is the self-assessment? Well, there are 3 questions. What about the activities? What about the partner? And what about the funder? Activities. Is there a military purpose? Is that clear that there is a military purpose? If yes, we have to go to the commission. Is there a significant risk of misuse of the results, or can it give rise to serious human rights violations? Okay, to the commission. But again, mostly the answer is no on these questions. Partner, are you working together with FWO in French? Problem. If you are working together with, say, a German weapon producer, then we have to discuss that in the commission. Again, here also the partner is the linked to serious human rights violations. That question comes again. Or is there a chance of misuse? And the fund, the same questions have to. If on one of these 6 questions the answer is yes, we ask that these proposals are submitted to the commission, and then the commission itself will assess it and give an advice on it. What are the criteria that we use in the commission? That is 10 criteria which are used. It's not a big list, but we look to human rights, we look to who's paying, we look to the TRL level, we look to the possibility of misuse, what type of weapons are developed, etc., etc. So these 10 criteria are used in the commission for every project that is treated. The commission itself tries to be an image or a mirror of the university with members from the 3 groups, so the science, technology, humanities, and biomedical science. We have some staff members, and we have the chair and the secretary. They are people with an ethical background, they are people with human rights background, and they are specialists in the 3 fields. Possible answers are positive advice, mostly more than 95% get positive advice, negative advice, but then we give a very detailed argumentation and motivation, and even then they can go to the KU to get in the field procedure. We get already several projects in the university, projects together with the Royal Military School. We have several DIFRA projects running. We work on European level, we work with Swiss, for instance. And there are some projects together with NATO and the United States. It's not easy to work on military projects in the university. Here I give some elements like security clearance, open science versus secrecy, and we like not that there is an impact on education. We like to keep the education as civil as possible. This is an example of one of the teams at the university which has several military projects, and you see that they have 6. It's not necessary that you read them all, but they have many procedures and guidelines and information available for their collaborators, because not every collaborator will work on this project, and there are reasons to keep these procedures running. And the last point that I'd like to say is it's very important that our researchers are aware of what they are doing, because what you do